What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 2020 album by JJ Demon and Greazy Jenkins. Basically, this project is called Josie Wails, and it came out in the spring of 2020. So the thing about this particular project is this is another collaboration project from JJ Demon, which is pretty awesome because he has some good ones. He did one with like Captain Midnight or something like that in 2015. I reviewed that back in the spring of 2023. It's called, I forget what that one was called, but it's in the JJ Demon playlist if you want to fuck with that. It's kind of a very low key project, not available too many places, just pitches like that. It's not on Spotify, so I'd say it's a pretty nice one. But basically, the last JJ Demon project I reviewed was back in the fall of 2023 when I reviewed Spirit Cooking from 2017. And I gave that album like a 10 out of 10. But I remember talking with Jackal Goldkick in the past, and he had said that JJ Demon in recent times kind of switched to boom-bap, more things that relative situation, more so than like the alternative kind of emo rap stuff that he did in like the 2010s as far as that picture goes. And I can see that on this particular album. This is kind of, I mean, it's not like a full blown, just entirely coded in boom bap type stuff, but it is definitely a different pitch, especially from like the trap oriented type stuff from JJ Demon of Spirit Cooking. Don't really know Greazy Jenkins that well, but it's an interesting concept kind of get these fellows on here just because it really feels like something ripped out of 1993 or 1995. If you like albums like Return to the 36 Chambers, or not Return, but Enter the 36 Chambers by Wu Tang, even Return to the 36 Chambers by Old Dirty Bastard, some of those type ones, and like the Mob Deep album, I forget what it's called, but it has that song that's like at the beginning of 8 Mile, pitches like that. That first song that you hear when the movie first starts, pitches like that. The Mob Deep song from the 1995 album. Pretty good stuff to kind of get here. This is just a lot of East Coast grime. It's just a differential type pitch. So this one is not trap whatsoever. I'd have to say it's a different pitch from what JJ Demon did in 2017. It's just an interesting concept. But the thing about this particular album is just the fact there's not really any club songs on here. A lot of this is just very much just coded in city. If you're just living in Philadelphia or New York or Massachusetts, some of those type places, Baltimore, places like that, some of those type spots. This place is up on the East Coast and other type spots as far as that particular kind of goes. Cleveland, some of those type places as far as that particular kind of goes. Just more East Coast type fair sit, skyscrapers, cityscaping, stuff like that. This is a great album for that sort of pitch. It gave me some similar vibes to like Life After Death. Not quite as mafioso as that one in particular, but definitely has some of that relative kind of feeling that is like a real rooted in New York kind of sound. This is probably one of the more recent New York projects I can think of that really has some emphatic flair just about it. Just really take it just, I mean, obviously you can think of like New York type movies, stuff like that when you think of like Goodfellas, some of those type movies in particular. But I would also have to say in like a video game type sense, it reminds me of like the early 2000s PlayStation 2 games, pitches like that, games like Grand Theft Auto 3 and Max Payne, some of that type of stuff. When you think of like those more rooted in New York type sounds that just have a lot of that grime, just as far as that particular. I feel like if you like Max Payne, some of that type of stuff, I would definitely have to say it's a pretty good pitch to kind of get that relative type feel as far as that kind of goes. Just that grime, just overcast day pitches like that, just really the turnabout of like the Big Apple and kind of like a more forlorn type sense and some of those type things as far as trying to get that just the real kind of malaise type atmosphere. I mean, this is not really makeshift type music, but it does have a lot of commerce just for getting errands done, getting those bills paid, getting the cell phone paid for, pitches like that, some of those type things is out and about, getting like donuts and hot dogs, some of those type pitches as far as that particular kind of goes. It's just a real good commerce type project, but there's not really any club song on here. And I'm not even sure if there's a single or something like that or music videos. I mean, the thing about trying to find that JJ Demon stuff is it's always very low key to the point where this project is just kind of relatively. I get the feeling that this is a digital only project and some of that type of stuff. So just being able to say, I'm not as full blown familiar with Greazy Jenkins, but I do like the concept. And this album was produced by Chef Soul, who I don't know that well, but he seems like an East Coast producer. Chef Soul seems like an East Coast producer, which is a pretty good pitch just because some of these are pretty good. It's just kind of the concept that it just is offhanded from the dip. This project is just offhanded from like the typical format as to how I would listen to music. Because I look at these songs are good, and I do respect the quotient behind them. I do definitely respect the quotient, and the overall feel and quality of some of these songs, but it's just different from like the recreational value because this just feels like a loud pack towards daily living and this kind of more city bustle, just with that sort of concept of just having to get stuff done and kind of be more of the active commerce in this day to day type fare. And it's not to say that that's a bad concept. It's just kind of the reality that there's not much time for recreation. I do feel like JJ Demon, Greazy Jenkins, at least smoke a bit, have some switchers smoked and pitches like that, or joints, some of those type things. But for the most part, minus like hotboxing and a whip with some of your buddies and some of those type things, for the most part, I just feel like this is pretty much just standard, just day activity and commerce like that. Just the sort of fanfare that's just doesn't really have time for like the ladies songs on here, the car songs, pitches like that, smoking, I mean, full blown all out drug songs, some of those type fares, not really posse songs or stuff like that for the most part as far as that pitch kind of goes. It's just kind of the concept that it's just less recreational. Just kind of, it's more steadfast, which is interesting just because the concept behind it. I mean, this came out in 2020 when like the COVID pandemic was pretty huge. So it's just kind of the concept far as trying to say and stuff that this is just kind of a different time. But I just look after just paying attention to like the city bustle. It just really works. If you do miss like the golden era of hip hop, some of those type times like 90s hip hop, some of those type things in terms like East Coast type fare, Mobb Deep, Nas, Wu Tang, Old Dirty Bastard, some of those type folks, Ghostface Killah from like 1993, 1996. This is some good concepts, but is very minimalist and not necessarily minimalist in terms of quality, but just minimal in terms of like the flair and just kind of overall pizzazz of like something. There's not really like a booming club song or like some sort of suave pizzazz that this is something that you can drive up the street and kind of have like that you can kind of drive up the street and have that pizzazz of people being able to hear you from quite a distance as far as that particular kind of goes. They're not really like serenade ladies songs to kind of serenade the ladies and pitches like that as far as that particular kind of goes. So it's just basically just fanfare for day commerce. But so out of these 13 songs, so I did recommend 9 of them, which is a pretty good pitch. I mean, it's typical fare for like JJ Demon with what I'm familiar with nowadays. I mostly like most of the stuff he's done. It's actually a pretty good assortment considering how offhanded this project was for me. It's kind of the concept. I like these songs. It's not as immediate for me just because I look after the concept of this just being more day commerce pitches like that. I just prefer more recreational type vibes, but this is still going to get a pretty high score. This would have to say and stuff as far as that particular pitch kind of goes along with it. I would look after it. Yeah, so like I was saying, there's 9 out of 13 songs that I recommend on this particular album. So basically, the 4 songs I don't recommend would just be Chutch, Family Affair, Sweatpants Tucked in My Socks, and The Worker's Wail. So I just would have to say, basically, Family Affair and The Worker's Wail are just some more kind of homely type songs and just kind of more city hopping, just like a more straightforward sense and just kind of more. I mean, these are less recreational than even some of the songs that are on here that are just more steadfast in the first place. So I look after these are just kind of more ground type ones that just have less recreational value as a whole. But I feel like most of this album is pretty steadfast, but these particular songs are just more in the sense of just being more get stuff done and less just have more of like a jive kind of doing it. Sweatpants Tucked in My Socks is like a poor type club type song. I feel like there's at least one attempt of having some decent kind of dance bustle on here, but I just feel like this relative kind of boom bap type beat. I mean, I liked it at the beginning of the song, but it kind of switched it up later on Greazy Jenkins's parts. I kind of would have liked it to have had a little bit more better bounce to it as far as that pitch kind of went along with it. Just something with a little bit more drive. They did at least try and have a little bit of like a step out, but it's just a poor rendition just because they probably should have had way more songs like that. Not really so much in like a commotion type aspect as far as that particular kind of went. It probably could have used a little bit more flair. I know JJ Demon can pull out those vibes, but he just didn't do it that well in this particular one. It's lyrical. It's the kind of concept. I mean, for folks that like super lyrical rap, just within the pitch of getting some of that and do like some decent kind of dance pizzazz or relative club hustle or outing type flair about it, this is a decent one to kind of get, but it just doesn't have much flair in terms of like more albums that have that better pizzazz just going with it with a lot more flash of that to say. And then Chutch is just kind of a poor type one. And then Chutch just felt like some afternoon bustle that didn't really have like good instrumentation towards that. I mean, I feel like some have almost like jazz rap type in mind just within that relative pitch, just kind of the assortment, just like some almost Latin spice towards it, but it just didn't pull out the vibes quite as well as it needed to. It was just kind of one, just the bustle of like day activity just was not quite as fitting. I definitely feel like they needed a little bit more dance bounce on this particular album. I feel like they definitely I like the fact that they had some smokish type flair about this, but this in particular, for the most part, this album is not necessarily like for squares, but this is kind of the concept that they're just really like laced up on this particular project. By laced up, I mean they're just suited up and just have less time to kind of kick back and have football playing, jersey music, smokage, pizza music, some of those type things. Just in particular, just the standard hangout type fast. It's just a little bit more deeply rooted. It's a little bit more deeply rooted and kind of more in like a once again, I mean, obviously to say steadfast, but I just can't come up with other words at this moment to say as far as that particular kind of goes. Just more composed, I'd say, maybe possibly graceful pitches like that. Just a little bit more with this like work and blue collar, white collar kind of in mind, I'd have to say. So that's kind of the concept. But to talk about some of these songs on here. So basically, these songs do have jive about them. They definitely remind me of just like a radio station from like Grand Theft Auto 3, some of those type pitches, or like the background music, Max Payne, some of those type pitches that just like East Coast type flair with just like that typical kind of pizzazz of like the early 2000s. I mean, it really reminds me more of like 94, 95. I would have to say just the concept of some of that ruggedness, just with the more stylish flair that it has. I mean, these are definitely 2020, 2019 productions on here, but it's just kind of the concept that just keeps it in like a more updated rendition of something that would have came out in 1994. So to talk about some of these, like I do feel like Elevators is a pretty nice one. This is like an indoor commerce and graceful outing commotion of a song, I'd have to say in particular. It's like some good hotel music and definitely like a lazy New York City. It's like some good hotel music and like a lazy New York City day kind of activity of a song, I'd have to say. So it's a good concept for that. This really does feel like some music you'd listen to in an elevator pitch, just like that. Just the concept of this being kind of in a more robust or just kind of more graceful, kind of suave kind of outing as far as that particular kind of goes. There's some sophistication as far as that would particularly kind of happen. Just some good concepts, but it's just so elegant to the point where it's just kind of like, you just have to realize it's just for a different assortment day. This is just different kind of commotion of songs. I feel like Viz is another one that's kind of like that, kind of similar fashion. Not quite as much hotel music, but definitely some elegant type flair. It's like an elegant kind of noir like city commerce of a song. I had to say in particular, this one reminds me of like Biggie's Life After Death Days. So I'd have to say some lyrical damage on this particular song, and this is just a pretty steadfast day to kind of listen to. So some of these type ones, if you do like songs like Niggas Bleed and What's Beef, some of those type pitches, just with that East Coast type flair, it's like a good rendition. I mean, it has that 90s flavor about it, but it's just kind of the concept of just having some of that relative kind of New York tinge kind of pizzazz about it. I feel like Ghost Dog is a pretty nice one. This one definitely feels like a swinging type song, like the 60s swingers pitches like that. It's like a vintage kind of Rat Pack days of swinging. It's like a vintage kind of Rat Pack days of a song, I'd have to say. It's like some swinging kind of city hopper of a tune, I would definitely have to suppose. And this is like a good kind of out on the town, go to a show, kind of mingle and drink type song, I'd have to say in particular. So if you do like rap music, but then you like folks like Frank Sinatra and some of those type folks, people from the 50s, 60s, some of those type folks, don't know a ton of these folks, but I just can't think of them at the moment, I'd have to say. But some of those type folks from like the 50s and swinging type days, I'd say this is a pretty good pizzazz of one. Kind of go to like a Broadway show or just pitches like that, just some sort of show out on the East Coast, some of those type flares as far as that would kind of happen. A lot of this is pretty good, like Subway and hot dog type music. Some of those restaurants and just kind of more hot dog shop type places that you get on the East Coast, it's more outdoor type fare and like a big city bus. A lot of these songs work pretty well for that. There's also some songs on this particular album that remind me a lot of like the Slim Shady EP by Eminem, just some of that drowsy typeness and sleepy typeness, I'd have to say. One example of this would be Manny Fresh. I definitely have to suppose it's like a floaty kind of drowsy city vibes that this song particularly kind of gives off. It's like a great lyrical song for hotboxing the whip, I'd have to say in particular. Definitely some smokish type tunes. When you think of Old Dirty Bastards Return to the 36 Chambers, that was a great album for hotboxing in the car, pitches like that. This is a pretty good song for that, and this is like this is like a zone out kind of East Coast type feel that this song particularly kind of has. So I do like the overall 90s pizzazz of a lot of these, just in particular. This works, but it's just kind of the fashion that these are good songs just within a sense, but it's just kind of the concept that you're just, if you can think back to like the vibes, if you remember like times like 1993, or even if you were doing that in like the thousands or 2010s, some of those type pitches, the way that folks listened to like folks like Ghostface Killah and Nas and some of those type folks back in 1993, 1997, it's a good concept to kind of get some of these songs. I feel like songs like Gun Run, I feel like songs like Gun Run, Manny Fresh, Drexel, Elevators in some cases, and like a little bit of Viz and Mask Shortage and Apothecary, some of those type ones. Yeah, some of those type ones in particular just have a lot of good flair to kind of have within that sense. It's definitely just, I mean, they did their homework in terms of being able to pull off like a 90s theme kind of New York type album. So it works pretty well. It's this kind of concept. This is very stark productions, but it does have the vibe of just some great hotbox type music and just overall hangout type flair just on the East Coast. Some good concepts. So Mass Shortage is another one that's just like that. It's like a big city on murky dredge day kind of feels. Mass Shortage is like a big city on like a murky kind of dredge day type feels that this song particularly kind of gives off. This one definitely reminds me of like Max Payne and some of those type pitches from like the 90s, but just in a more kind of relative stylish to like recent times kind of feel about it. And this is like some, this is just like some Max Payne grime, I'd have to say in particular. And this is like an out and about kind of city bustle with song, I'd say. So it's a good concept. Just some of that relative kind of overcast day type pitch, just on the East Coast, some of that type flair. Real good concept just to be immersed in the city as far as that kind of goes. So the thing about this particular project is it is kind of a theme. If you do get tired of like the relative, just I mean, it's good to kind of have some of these coastal type projects just to get a taste of something different. Where like the Southern albums, that ringtone rap, some of those type pitches, swag rap, some of those type things do get tiresome. It's just a good taste of like what the East Coast is kind of up to be able to say some of these type times. It's a relative good flair. I mean, it's not like it's just a good concept kind of get that. I mean, this one feels like a banner kind of East Coast album the more I think about it. I mean, obviously, when you think of New York, you think of like Ready to Die and Illmatic and some of those type ones. But I'd say for like recent times, this is pretty much on par with some heavy type stuff that's kind of gone along. I definitely feel like the quality of this particular project is particular there. It's just kind of the concept that this is a different kind of product. It just kind of has a certain degree of like a learning curve in terms of the production of some good stuff. Another highlight is Tasteful Majesty. I'd have to say it's like a jivey kind of radio jingle with like a relative groove about it. I'd have to say in particular, this one's kind of a foot tapper. I'd have to say just a real nice one to kind of listen to on the go. It's pitches like that. I'd have to say it's like a good drowsy day for like some city activity, and it's just a pretty good cruise song. I'd have to say. So this one kind of feels like something for like hotel music stuff like that. Just another kind of elegant type day, kind of similar to like Viz and some of those type ones. There's another song I was listening like Elevator, some of those type ones. I mean, this one's not really an in-your-face kind of grimy type one. I'd have to say it was just kind of a sleepy type one that just has some relative bounce about it. Something that Mac Miller would do or Wiz Khalifa, some of those type folks, just with like the typical taste of the city, but then also the aspect of kind of having like a decent kind of job where you're just in a relatively peppy mood. Maybe you smoked a little bit and you just feel good, something like that. That's what I have to say. So Apothecary is kind of like a sleepy kind of smoke a few, get errands done type tune in like a groggy sense. I'd have to say in particular. This is definitely some lyrical flame I'd have to say, but this is also some good urban day commotion I'd have to say in particular. So it's a good concept, just kind of smoking on the go, stuff like that. Maybe getting snackage, picking up like a croissant at like a gas station, some of those type of pitches as far as that particular kind of goes. I mean, it could be residential. I feel like some of this stuff could be residential, but I just see more of like the big city in mind in a lot of cases, less of like town. This is kind of more of a bigger city type album, I'd have to say. So I feel like Gun Run is like a blurry, kind of grimy 90s vibe, kind of city hopping of a song I'd have to say in particular. It's definitely like a smoke a joint, kind of get a hot dog on like an overcast day type feels of this particular one. And this is just like a good Big Apple kind of hit, I'd have to say. So some good concepts here just to be able to have. Just appreciate the East Coast pitches like that. Pretty stellar album out of recent times, I'd have to say. In terms of like the 2020s, I feel like this is a relatively banner type project. Just has a differential type feeling that tried something different compared to most of these trap centric type albums and stuff like that. I feel like for the most part in like the 2020s, it feels like most folks either went with boom bap or like trap music. It's just if you're not doing old school like back in 1992 type stuff, it probably was trap as far as that particularly kind of went. In terms like the retro kind of in terms like the retro type stuff that kind of happened in like the 2010s, the standard rap album when you think of like Eminem's Encore, 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying, some of those type ones, there weren't a ton of those past like 2015 or so. It mostly just became when you think of rap music, it's just kind of more trap as a full blown kind of thing. But this is kind of that's about the only other subgenre I can think that really became prevalent past like 2018 or 2019 or so. It's just the boom bap type stuff or like trap. So it's this kind of thing. But this is a good boom bap just to be able to have that relative aspect of just getting some 2020s type flair, some good type stuff. I feel like Drexel is kind of like a swirling, kind of druggy feeling, tore up, kind of outing pizzazz of a song I'd have to say in particular. This one reminds me of like Wu Tang and Mobb Deep, some of those type folks I'd have to say. This is like some 90s New York kind of grime I would definitely have to say in particular. And this is probably one of the better ones to, it's probably one of the better ones to get fucked up to with a little bit more recreational value. I'd say probably like Mass Shortage is a pretty good one for that. Ghost Dog is definitely a good outing type pizzazz. That one's at least the Ghost Dog is at least one with like some good pizzazz for like some flair of stepping out. But I'd say probably Elevators, Drexel, and maybe like Apothecary, like some ones to just kind of smoke to and just have hotboxing and like the whip pitches like that. But then Manny Fresh is a pretty good one for that as well. So it's just kind of the concept. I feel like for the most part, the smokage is just kind of kept a more city traverse, just being out and about, picking up some food, something like that, getting like a hot dog or like a Subway sandwich, something like that, and just smoking along the way, just behind buildings, stuff like that, I'd have to say. Or hotboxing in the whip with buddies as far as that kind of goes. But for the most part, it's interesting. This particular album did not really have makeshift songs, but this is kind of the commerce of this. It's not necessarily work shift type music, but then it's not necessarily recreational going out to a club and kind of getting crunk as far as that particular kind of goes. So it's just kind of the after effect of just like transition type music and just after effects of getting errands done. A lot of this is just errands music, car type music, and city on foot traverse type music, just within the bustle like aspects of this being out and about, I'd say. But it's just not quite at like the shindig or something like that. So it's just kind of the commerce of just kind of being on the go, just stuff like this. It's great music for that sort of appeal. So that's kind of the thing where it's not worship, but it's also not full blown recreational either, I'd say. So that's kind of the thing. But in terms of what I'm going to score this album, me basically recommending 9 songs out of 13 on this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like an 8.75 out of 10. I mean, it's really enjoyable, definitely like a pretty good album just to be able to say within that sense. Has some great. This is definitely like a well-meaningly enjoyable album. I'd have to say just with the overall flair and style that it pulls off, but it's just different from like the stuff that was going along with like. But it's just different from like the style of what was going along across like the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years and pitches like that. I'd say it's just an alternative to like the styles if you do just like trap music, just getting some more stuff in like that relative kind of 90s and 80s type fashion, I'd have to say. But it's just kind of the concept that's not really full blown recreational. I think there's not really drinking songs on here either. I have to say, so if you're not just smoking in the whip with your buddies or smoking at like the crib, something like that, or just smoking on the go, getting like food and pitches like that, like Subway, I'd have to say it's just for the most part that this is just kind of an album of just being traversed. So it's just kind of the concept of this is some good stuff here, but it's just kind of the pitches behind it is it has a pretty themed type aspect and kind of mind. If you don't mess with the theme or you just have less of a learning curve towards it, it just is not as enjoyable, I'd say, which is kind of the concept. It's just a different taste. This takes it back to like 1993, 1995 Mob Deep and Wu Tang type days, pitches like that, just that East Coast kind of New York grime. It's just kind of the concept that the relatively kind of skeletal kind of productions on here are just different from a lot of stuff that was going on in like the 2020s and late 2010s, I'd have to say. But the social score, that's kind of tricky. I think I'll give the social score like a 7 out of 10 because this is some good stuff here, but it's just kind of the concept that you just have to look after it. It doesn't have a single. It has kind of doesn't have a single. It has retro productions, and it just overall has like a type feeling in terms of like the production type for that feels like from 30 years prior to what the times were kind of being around that time. So this is kind of concept. It's good music, but it's just very retro and kind of minimalist as far as that particular kind of goes. There's no club songs, no dance songs, no lady songs, no car songs, pitches like that. Just really the recreational type flair and just overall style. This is more of a substance album. This is more of a substance album more so than a style album. I'd say it definitely has lyrical content. If you do like lyrics, JJ Demon and Greasy Jenkins are some good cats to kind of fuck with here to be able to have some of that. It's just kind of the concept that this is retro and like that sort of sense that just takes it back to that. It's a good album, but this is a different taste. I feel like this is kind of somewhat revolutionary just because it was an alternative to like styles. If you really were tired of some of those trends that were going on, it's just kind of the concept that it's kind of somewhat of an acquired taste in terms of like the quality of it. So this is kind of thing. So Seven Social. In terms of the future, like JJ Demon has at least put out an album in 2023. I've got a couple more projects by him to get to. I'm going to get to some of those as time goes along. We'll definitely get to like his 2021 album pitches like that. I don't know his full blown about Greasy Jenkins. I'd have to say it was just a good offshoot of a project here. Just would have to say. I mean, like I said, I'm not like the number one, number two fan of like boom bap type styles, but this is a pretty good album. This is a whelmingly good project that had a lot of good aspects of just quality just about it in particular. It's just kind of the fact that it's an acquired taste and it's just not quite as recreational, I'd say. It's not really makeshift type music either, but it's just kind of the concept. It's just more steady and like the Travers, so just outing type fare as far as that goes, just errands, stuff like that. So that's the concept. But 8.75 score, 7 social. That's the concept of it. Basically, this is a quality album to recommend. It just is kind of an acquired taste.